So hello everyone, welcome. We're here for another podcast with Karla Timmons from the USA. She lives there in the Washington, D.C. for more than 30 years. Right, Karla? So welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be with you.
Yes, absolutely. I'm very happy. So we've met in our NGO, our organization. So we were there in the Amazon together, right? And it was amazing. So what was the biggest impression you've got from Brazil?
The trip to the Amazon was the second or the third time that I'd been to Brazil. So I've gotten to see different pieces and parts. And the week before we spent in the Amazon, we were in Fortaleza, if you remember.
Fortaleza, yes.
Did all the beaches.
It was sunny and hot.
That was great fun. Yeah. And after I left you, I went. Our flight was supposed to go through Manaus down to Sao Paulo and back home, but the flight to the flight to Sao Paulo got delayed, and we ended up spending the night somewhere else. I don't even remember where, and my luggage got lost, and it was just.
Oh my. Yes. Now I remember everything.
And I don't speak much Portuguese, and the airline didn't speak much English, and so that was one of my most memorable things about that trip, was trying to track down my luggage and trying to get back home. So, but beyond that, it was a great trip.
How many days did it last to get your?
We did just one extra overnight in a hotel where everything just, when it goes wrong, right, doesn't it just, everything seems to go wrong. And so I had no other clothes, and so I had taken my stuff off, and I put it on the floor so that I wasn't sleeping in my Amazon clothes, right, because they already were filled with stench from the week you and I spent together in the Amazon. Yeah. So I put them on the floor, and then the air conditioner leaked out. So when I got up that morning, right, I had not only my Amazon clothes on, but Amazon clothes that were wet. And that was my trip out of Brazil the last time I went.
Yeah, I'm sorry about it. I even didn't remember that story. So, Karla, you've been living in the Washington, D.C. for all this time. Could you please tell our listeners, podcasters, what is it like, and what would you recommend for foreign tourists visiting your city? What are the main highlights there in Washington, please?
Sure. So to put Washington, D.C., I think, and the question that you're asking, what to see, into context, I think it's important to note that Washington, D.C. is not a state, it's a district, and it's an area that actually is defined in our Constitution, in the United States Constitution, that it would be 10 miles square, which is not 10 square miles. It's actually then 100 square miles. And it was territory that was given up by Maryland and Virginia, which are the two surrounding states. I live actually in Maryland, in a suburb of DC. And in 1847, Virginia took their territory back. So what's left of DC was originally Maryland territory. And it was originally shaped as a square or a diamond, if you're looking at the map. And now it's kind of cut off by the Potomac River, which is the big river that goes through this area. So within that area that's left, only about a third of it is the federal property or the federal buildings that people think of when they say DC. So there is just so much more. So while obviously people from outside of the United States think of DC as the as the Capitol and the White House, and all of those things are certainly worth seeing. There's
Indeed.
just so much more to the area than just that federal swath of property that we think of. But within that area, one of the things to not miss, of course, is the Smithsonian. All of the museums,
the
museums
right?
that are part of that federal area are all
Mhm.
free to the public.
Nice.
And the most popular Smithsonian museum to visit is the National Air and Space Museum. And that's the one that talks about the history of flight. There's the Apollo moon capsule in there. It's a terrific place.
Apollo moon capsule is there?
Yes, yes.
Really?
But beyond that, I want to use this just as a plug for what's outside of DC. There's this national park that's called the Chesapeake in Ohio towpath. And it was, so the Potomac that I mentioned earlier,
Mm-hmm.
falls, the topography falls as you
Mm-hmm.
come into the DC area. And so there are great waterfalls and
Oh, wow.
and in some places just rapids, but it's to where back in the day in the 1800s you couldn't get ships up and down, barges up and down the river. And so this area along the whole swath of the Potomac River from the Washington, D.C. area up to Cumberland, Maryland was, scooped out
Mm-hmm.
by immigrants generally, German folks and Irish folks, and
Mm-hmm.
all came over, did the hard work. So it's an engineering marvel, but in addition to that, it has a lot of really great history about the families that lived along the towpath. And it's called a towpath because what it was is the barges would go up and down this canal towed by mules. And families lived along there providing supplies to the families generally that lived on the barges that would bring coal down to the DC area from the hills up in Maryland and West Virginia. So I would say that's one of the things to check out and look along. And about 4 years ago, a girlfriend and I hiked the entire length of that. It's 185 miles.
Wow.
And it's filled with history as well as plants and animals and pawpaw trees and other things that give this area so much history outside of just the DC federal area.
Wow, that's so interesting. I've never heard of it, and it's so nice because you're local, so you know everything, right? So it's so nice. What's the name of the Federal Reserve again? The reserve, the natural reserve that I think it's cut by the river. Is that it?
So the Potomac is the river. The
Mhm.
national park that's along there is called the C&O Canal.
C&O Canal, okay.
And that was put in place before the train. And so there was a race between the folks building the canal and the people building the train tracks to go to the same place again to bring the coal down to the city out of Baltimore. So it was the B&O Railroad and the C&O Canal that were in a race back in the 1800s in order to try to build this out. And by the time the canal got built, it was obsolete because the train was already in place. But it still is, I think, a great story about the canal families that lived on the boats and the canal families then that had schools and little shops and stores to outfit the people that were on the board or on the barges. So I think that's kind of cool.
Wow, it's very interesting indeed. I know because we've met before that you worked for the American government, right? For many years. I think it was your main job all over your life, right?
Yes.
Mainly in the Defense Logistics Agency, what you call DLA, right?
Yes.
So could you please describe a little bit what is the function of this agency in the American government?
DLA is part of the Department of Defense, but it's a standalone agency, and it's considered a purple agency, which means it's not Army or Navy or Air Force.
Purple,
so
the color.
Purple agency. So during the course of my career, I worked for Navy admirals and Air Force and Army generals, and every few years, the command would switch out, and it would be a progressive kind of thing, so that you didn't generally have two Navy admirals in a row, for instance. But DLA, DLA's objective actually supports all of the military agencies, which is why it has the rotating purple command, and it's the logistics support, meaning it provides the supply, the consumable and repair parts to all of the military organizations, as well as the distribution of those, and as well as the disposition. So whether it's fuel or lumber or aviation support or support for the Navy ships, the Navy warships, if it's a spare or consumable part, it's managed by DLA.
Wow, it's a very complex operation, isn't it?
Yeah, it's about 25,000 people, and it's in 48 states. So it's all across the United States.
Wow.
And the mission has stayed pretty consistent over the years, which is also nice. It's not just a place that changes depending on which political party is in charge.
That's so interesting. And in one of your positions in this agency, right, you dealt with budget and economic analysis on multi-million-dollar systems, right? And which position was that?
Well, so with DLA, I started at the very bottom of the rungs, right out of high school, and went through the paces in an intern program, and I was an inventory manager. So that's the person in the organization who decides how much stock of this certain thing, a rotary blade for a helicopter, how many of those we need and where they need to be located to best support the military organization that's going to use that particular product. Well, there are systems, obviously, that are behind those decisions and that take care of the distribution of them. So I moved, it was just kind of a logical movement from being a user of those systems to at one point being involved in the development and replacement of those systems. And my role in that system piece wasn't the coding. I'm not a software developer, but in support of those kinds of people, you've got people that are fighting to get the money for them, and that within DoD and every other government agency is based on what's known as an economic analysis or a business case analysis, where you say this is what the system's going to cost, but this is the savings that it will result in, and hopefully then you're able to make the case that I need this upfront money to be able to put this in place in order for you to get the savings down the road. And that was the job then that I was doing when I was with DLA in support of this replacement of what was a COBOL system with commercial off-the-shelf type software. And so from there, I left DLA and went to General Services Administration, where instead of just doing the budget piece of a system, I was the program manager in charge of not just the budget, but making sure we had the right contractor doing our software replacement and rolling it out and doing the testing. And that job then led to a similar type position with Treasury, where that was an HR system. So it was so with DLA, it was a supply chain type of solution.
Supply chain,
With
right.
General Services Administration, it was called a customer relationship management, to give them more information about their workings with the customers that they supported. And then with Treasury, it was human resources. So it was all systems type support, in probably the last 10 to 15 years of my career with the government.
Just one point. So this general service, you said, right? Is it linked to DLA or it's something separate?
So that's interesting. So part of my job's kind of the division within the government is either it's a DOD type job or it's a civilian organization. And GSA was a civilian organization. And what's really interesting there kind of is the politics involved, not politics with the big P, not the Democrats and the Republicans and the Green Party and all, but the politics internally, where within a DOD organization, like I mentioned, with DLA, you have an admiral or an Air Force or whomever that's kind of in charge, and it's very directive.
There's a rigid hierarchy. Is that it?
Yes. Where within GSA, it's all very, while there obviously is an administrator, it's much more fluid as to who's actually in charge. And that was a big adjustment for me to go from an organization where if you were able to convince the hierarchy that this was the right thing to do, you knew that you were going to be successful, instead to an organization where everybody was in charge.
It was more difficult.
And each person, of course, had their own agenda and were protecting their own systems and all. And your system would negate the need for mine, and I kind of like mine, and therefore we're not going to listen to anyone who would to replace ours. So it was a very tough adjustment, and I actually did not stay in GSA very long. I went to Treasury, and like I said, in Treasury, it was an HR system. It was already kind of in place. So while you had some of those same political considerations that existed in GSA, many of them had already been worked out. Not that people didn't still argue over the right direction, but it was a better fit for me, given that my background had been in DoD.
And in this way, since you've done different things within these agencies, right? What do you think is the biggest challenge to work in a governmental position in USA? I mean, is it about your background? You are an administrator from Harvard, right? So what do you think is the main point of being able to work on such a very complex position like that? And which one did you like the most? Because you've had many, right?
Like I said, I think that persuading people to do this, you can show that it's the right thing to do, but because there's so many issues that they're bringing to the table, the change management piece of any type of big implementation, whether it's a system or a reorganization or whatever it is, it's getting the people to buy into it and bringing them on board that I think is the biggest challenge, which was probably true in private industry too.
Yeah.
But my favorite job was actually with the Army Corps of Engineers, and that too was
Army Corps of Engineers, right?
Yes.
We've got cut here. Army Corps of Engineers, yes.
Yes. And the reason I liked that job was because it combined policy and systems and the inspections. So inspections always has a dirty horror, undercurrent to it. But in this case, we were going out and doing compliance inspections, but what we were able to find out during those compliance inspections is why the policy or the system wasn't working for someone. And then because my office also had the policy and the system solution, we were able to come back from those inspections and say, this is what needs to be changed. Not this is what the field is doing wrong, but instead, this is what we need to change either in our policies or in our systems to allow them to get to what we were trying to get to with the original policy.
Right.
So that was very rewarding.
Nice, interesting. And you also have participated, Karla, in many campaigns, right, for candidates and positions in the current and the past elections, right, as well as being an election judge. So could you please tell us a little bit this work and also what the main political parties in the United States are?
Sure. Now, I was prohibited from doing any of that type of thing when I was a government employee. As a government employee, the parties change, and despite whoever is in charge, you are still doing your job, and so you didn't help with any.
You work for the state, right?
Yes.
Therefore, you cannot have any interference from any party, let's say.
So this was kind of something new and fun to be able to do after I retired. And as an election judge, I still am not there necessarily representing a party. Instead, what you're trying to do is to make the election process accessible to everybody. So you're either helping them find their way to the machine that they'll use, or helping them understand, without leading them, understand what they need to do to fill out their written ballot, how they get their ballot counted, those kinds of things. And that's been fun. The days are very long, but that's been a lot of fun to see that in process, in motion, and to be able to be a part of that. But as you said, I've also been active in a couple of campaigns, but generally I'm more into the issue than I am into the person. So I've been to DC many times to march either in support of gun control or in support of women's choice for reproductive rights. So those, we live close to the metro. It's easy to get into town. You get to be with like-minded people, and that's energizing and exciting. I do remember, though, when I was in Brazil, there was marching in the street, and there was a lot of excitement about elections and issues going on too. So I suppose it's not unlike what I experienced when I was not when we went to the Amazon, obviously, but in the cities themselves. And so that's been a nice change after I retired.
And about the political parties, they're mainly two nowadays, right? You've got the Republicans,
right? So
and the Democrats.
Right, the Republicans and the Democrats. And I am not sure how this compares to Brazil, but we've
got many parties. Is much more complex than that. We really haven't had, nowadays we have this polarization going on, but anyways,
yes. Well, our at the federal level is they're elected by what's called an electoral college. And so each state feeds into that and sends representatives that then are to confirm the vote. So it's not a popular vote. And our last, not our current president, but our last president did not get the popular vote, and yet he was elected because he got the electoral. And there are a number of electors that are allocated to each state based on their population. And so if a state, say, voted 3/4 of their people voted for this person, but a quarter of their people voted for this person, this kind of gets negated. And all of those electoral votes, and this depends on the state, but all of those electoral votes go for the 75% of the voting public. And because some of the states were so very close to where maybe this was 49% and this was 51%, but all the electoral votes went here. Like I said, the last president before Biden did not have the popular vote, but was the president anyway, which I think is different maybe than a lot of countries where they have a direct one for one.
Yeah, we've got a popular vote here. So the one who's got the most votes wins the elections. Anyways, and what about the voting system in United States? Here in Brazil, we have had lots of polemic about our electronic voting system. We know that United States is a little different, right? But what's your opinion about this voting system since you worked really there with the elections, and how effective do you think it is for your country?
And so across the country, each state gets to make their own rules about how they're going to do the voting process. And some states have gone back to paper ballots, and some states continue with the electronic machines. What's going on now, though?
So sorry, you've got both, right? You've got part, depends on the state, literally, because each one is kind of independent in a way. Okay.
Yes. But what is happening right now is that there were some outlandish accusations made by some states about and some national people about the machines here in the United States, and that company is now suing those people for slander, and some of the media outlets for libel, which is the written untruths, because it did a lot of damage, not only to that company, but to the trust of whether or not the voting process was legitimate.
And not only one of the accusations, were proven right. Yes, so all the accusations didn't get to anywhere. In the end, they were pure lies, weren't they?
Right, that's exactly right. So it's interesting, though, that I think that this company is now suing those people for their lies, the media outlets that were continuing with those lies. So we'll see where that goes in our court system.
You mean the manufacturer of the urns, the electronic system, is literally prosecuting all these medias who are like with false accusations.
Yes,
I see.
Yes,
interesting. I haven't heard of it. Right.
I want to say the company is Dominion Republic, but I wouldn't swear to that. But the company that was responsible for the machines, like I said, was their reputation was damaged from all of the lies that were being spread. So anyway, now it's going to the courts for, as you said, to say that this was in fact a lie, and you hurt me by lying about it. Financially, you hurt me.
Yeah, sure. So we're heading to the end, but I still got a few questions. It's been so interesting and so nice And since you have actually worked in the past, right, for the state, as we were talking about, independently of the party governing the White House at that specific moment, did your political views change much throughout all your lifetime and throughout all this very interesting experience in the American government?
When I was with DLA, I didn't have much exposure to political appointees. DLA was a portion of defense, of the bigger defense organization, and we were, like I said, it didn't swing with whatever party was in charge.
Like you said before.
Yeah. But when I got to NOAA, which is part of the Department of Commerce, that was kind of my first exposure to political appointees. And I guess what I can say is that from that point on, and working at the higher rungs of the government, you get to know more political appointees. And they're the ones, political appointees are the people who are placed in government organizations that do not compete for their jobs in the same way that a federal civilian does. They're placed there because perhaps they worked on a campaign, or they know somebody or whatever, but they're expected to come in to those positions with qualifications. And I have to tell you, there were good political appointees in both parties, and people who were there just kind of making sure that they were rewarded for the work that they did on the campaign in both parties. A lot of the people then, once that particular political party is being voted out, find a way to embed themselves into the federal government. Actually, no different than a lot of the retired military do within our Department of Defense organization, and they become civilians, federal civilians within those government agencies. But the difference there is that they continue to have their loyalties based kind of on their political party. So when you get to an organization like that, GSA comes to mind, that everybody who was there as a political appointee knew who got there either as a Republican or a Democrat, and they used that to kind of build their network. So it's just a strange, again, very, very different than a Department of Defense organization. But my political views didn't change based on that. I think perhaps they have become more liberal based on where I live, not based on my government career. So I grew up in a very rural area in Michigan, and I still am in touch with a lot of people back there, and they're much more right-leaning than what I have become since I've lived in Maryland. But I think it's more an environmental factor than my job.
I think the environment plays a huge role on this positioning, right?
Yeah.
I think
where you live is where that's kind of your view. Yeah,
it's true. It's absolutely true. And last but not least, in your opinion, who is the most controversial politician in your country right now, and why?
Yeah. Okay. So that's easy. I mean, obviously it's Trump. And nobody even right now seems to be completely sure whether or not he's running in 2024, but he sure does keep things stirred up. So I mean, that was from my point of view, it was a very, very divisive administration, where Biden has been, I think, more about trying to pull the different factions together to move his agenda forward, but but with some give and take, where when Trump was in charge and Mitch McConnell had the Senate, it was where they were doing things that not even the majority of, again, he was not popularly elected. It was not the majority of the country wanted, but it was all part of their agenda and the people, actually the financiers of their agenda. So that's kind of maybe another topic for another time, but the whole
it probably is
funding of our political process in the United States needs to really be looked at.
Yeah, so to really finish now, who then finances this system in short? Do you have a public financing, private financing, both of them? Does it depend on the state? How does it work in short?
No, it's kind of a mixture, but because of rules that were put in place a few years ago by the Supreme Court, which is the ultimate court here in the United States.
We've got that here too. Sorry.
Okay. You don't always have visibility of who's financing it. It's hidden under the title of something else, and it could be the pharmaceutical companies could be funding something or someone that is very much in support of the pharmaceutical company, but you don't know that because you no longer have visibility of the corporation that is financing them. But then when they get into office and they vote for loosening up the regulations on the pharmaceutical manufacturers, then somebody does some sort of expose and you realize that, well, that's okay. That's where the money came from. Yeah.
Right. So, well, it's very complex and it's also very interesting how similar our democracies are. And of course, we've got lots of differences as well, not only in the voting system, but in the way that things are organized in a state way there in the United States, right? But it's been such a great time. Thank you so much. Very enlightening in these times we're living right now. Very difficult with lots of polarization. So yeah, let's see how things will turn out. But I'd like to thank you so much for this podcast. It's been such a pleasure talking to you, learning about all your vast experience in the government of United States, and also with this personal view, right? It's great because it kind of humanizes it. And it shows in a very concrete way how it is and gives us a glimpse of how things are really conducted up there in the north. So thank you. Thank you so much.
So come visit. I'll take you on the sea. I'll take you along the C&O Canal.
I really want to go and visit Washington, D.C., so I'll definitely let you know. I think it's great. It's going to be a great experience for whomever goes to United States. So just go and visit DC, and also because there is not only about the federal buildings and everything, right? There's much more of it.
Right.
All right. Thank you very, very much. Can't take you enough, and see you.
All right. Bye now.
Bye. Cheers.